Don't yet look like we have a quorum, but we can certainly have some meaningful conversation. And I want to take advantage of the time I have with all of you today. Um, I will tee up. My intention is to have a shortened meeting because I'm going to be asking for a little homework at the end. So we'll give some time on that. But let me go through the formalities here, given the structure of our task force. This is the September 30th meeting of the 1296 Task Force on the Rights of Coloradans with Disabilities. I don't see any members of the public on this line, but we will be streaming on YouTube and other apps. So if there are members of the public who would like to join for public comment, I would urge you to get over to the Zoom prior to 4:30 p.m. and we will welcome your thoughts at that time. You can also continue to share your ideas with the task force and each subcommittee on Engage Dora. With that, I'll just go over, as I do every time we get together, a few quick norms. One, we do ask everyone if you're in a place where it's safe and comfortable to do so, that you have your camera on if you're a member. We recognize that's not always the case, and we welcome your participation in any case. Also, I would ask a couple things. One, that you refrain from using the chat, which can become particularly distracting for folks with a screen reader. Frankly, just distracts from all of us being able to look at one another or stay engaged in the conversation. Finally, I would ask that everybody, the first time you speak, introduce yourself by full name, and anytime after that, just let folks know who is speaking. I will go over our agenda in just a minute, but we have our chair, Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera, on, so I'll hand it to you, ma'am.
Well, thanks, Barrick, and good afternoon, everybody. Go Broncos. I think you started to comment about the weather, Barrick, but yeah, it is a little toasty out, isn't it? It's great to be with you all as we plan for the final recommendations from the subcommittee that'll guide the final recommendations for the task force. So I know the subcommittees have put extensive time and expertise into the ideas that are moving forward. And as executive committee members, I want to make sure that we all give feedback on these ideas and also get feedback from anybody in your networks so that the recommendations adequately consider all perspectives and are really participatory. So I also want to thank Barrick and Carrie for all their hard work, condensing the many ideas and discussions into readable forms that are now being presented. And I also want to thank the Dora staff. I know Ginny's on for creating the 2-pagers from these ideas. So I'll be quick because I know Barrick has homework for us. So I'll hand it back to you, Barrick.
Wonderful. Thank you, ma'am. And yes, big thanks to our partners, Ginny and Katie and Aubrey at Dora, who are not only incredible thought partners to Carrie and I throughout this, but they've really taken the lead in creating these digestible formats based on your all recommendation and request at our last meeting. So just to give an overview of today's conversation, we are not going to spend today's time digging into the ideas themselves. I'm going to give you back a little bit of time and ask you to go and do some of that. What I want to do is talk about where we are with each of the subcommittees and then really spend our time talking about what this executive committee is going to need to get done at the end of this year and talk a bit about that process and how we want to approach it. What I don't want to do is wait until we see what everybody says about the ideas and then start debating our process. I'd rather us really align on things ahead of time. So where we are with the subcommittees, here's the good news. All of these subcommittees have concluded what I think was really their big lift, which was close to a year now of meeting, sometimes for extended periods. We brought them in at times for 2 and 3 hours at a piece. They learned a ton from people with lived experience, from people with professional experience, and others on each of these. They've now generated what's close to 100 different ideas on how we can ensure equitable access to everything about Colorado, from running for office to being employed to housing. As I shared last month, these ideas really fall into a few categories. Number one, enforcing what should already be the law and be being done. But they've highlighted that there's a need for more enforcement and compliance. Number two, they've highlighted the opportunities to better educate and inform, whether that's about programs and systems that exist or about what should be expected. They also talked about more forms of navigation to help, whether it's an individual with a disability understand the housing market or how to apply for a job with government, or help developers navigate the different requirements and different opportunities for them. I don't want to say there are no new ideas. As you all know, there are a ton of what I think are really bold, creative ideas for how we get information out about what the accessibility features are for a home, about how we make our outdoor recreation, from golfing to skiing to rivers, more accessible from the point of drop off to accessing restrooms and everything in between. So those ideas are now being consolidated or summarized in these 2- and 3-page documents. We're working on the final few with Katie and Ginny over at Dora. I will tell you the Kata rewrite is probably the toughest to consolidate ideas into one sentence. So we'll talk a bit about that. But the plan is to have all of these ready to go out this week. So we'll take some time talking about that. These ideas, if you had a chance to preview the ones that we just sent a little while ago, they have QR codes on them. They also have web links. So they've got the 1 or 2 sentence summary of the idea that then links back to Engage Dora to that particular section of ideas where people can immerse themselves in more of the details and gather that input. Our process then is we've adjusted the timing of the meetings for each of the subcommittee to be the second half of October. In October, then, we'll get all of these subcommittees the feedback that stakeholders have shared. You may remember we're not going out with the questions of, do you like this, yes or no? Do you oppose this or do you support this? It's really about what about these ideas would move the dial? What concerns do you have? What do you think are the important details or nuance? We'll bring all of that stakeholder feedback back to these subcommittees. And the second half of October and probably in early November, we'll do some extra meetings to decide which of these ideas need to be turned into recommendations. So we may see 20 ideas collapsed into anywhere from 5 to 10 or a dozen. Some of them may be combined. Some of them may be set aside that says this is a good idea that needs further development. What you all will get from these subcommittees is a report that has the following. For each of these ideas, it will name the problem they are looking to solve with a recommendation. It will state what the end state, the North Star, the end goal should be about this. For some where it will require an on-ramp to get all the way there, it will describe what are the minimum immediate steps that they believe need to be taken. These all come to you. And I think it's important, and this frames today's conversation, you all have a tremendous amount of latitude. And I'm reading directly from the legislation. It says the task force shall consider the reports of the subcommittees, but is not bound by any findings or conclusions of any subcommittee in producing its final report. That's the legislative language. We've had conversations over the last 6 months about your intent of how to digest and act on these committee recommendations, but that's where we're really going to spend our time today. So again, looking at our time frames, the subcommittees are required to deliver to you their reports by December. Our goal is to be at least on deadline and probably a few weeks, if not a little bit more, ahead of that. Why are we doing that? We all know legislative season is upon us. That means the governor and others are developing budgets. It means legislators are pulling bill titles. We want to make sure that if there is need for legislative action, that we're not running into the game late in February or March, because your report is not due until January 25th. So there is some time in there. That said, I never like to be sitting there on January 24th doing final edits. So our goal will be to get you all those reports prior to the 1st of December, then to have some conversations with you, recognizing that that second half of December tends to be a little difficult to have any extended conversations. We're probably going to try to squeeze in a couple of meetings there with all of you to work through the recommendations from the subcommittees, find out from all of you what you want to put in the reports in terms of the recommendations and where you want to get into more of the details, whether it's the specific lever of change, whether it's the means of ongoing compliance, monitoring, and enforcement, or just the need for these things to be continually monitored to stay current so that this isn't a one and done proposition. So that's the timeline. The subcommittees will really spend the next 6 weeks getting and digesting public input. Then they'll turn those into recommendations, get them to you. And our goal is going to be to work with you throughout December to get these ready so that when you come back the 1st of January, we're polishing up a report that you all feel you can stand behind. That leads to a whole lot of questions for us in terms of how are you going to act on these recommendations? What is the intent and the approach when you get an idea that may be unanimously recommended by a subcommittee and you have additional or different thoughts? How do you approach it when that idea comes to you, as some will, noting that the vote was not unanimous, and we'll share with you what that vote was. And then we want to talk about what we want to do with that January report. Before we go into the conversation about your process, I want to back up to that stakeholder engagement. I think this is probably the one thing that keeps me up at night the most, is making sure we get really robust input. We need to rely on all of you to do two things really in all of this. In addition to just reaching out to your folks, that outreach for me has two goals. First and foremost, to make our ideas stronger. We have a great group of people on each subcommittee and obviously on the executive committee that have done some incredible work and I think have some smart thinking. I'm also smart enough to know our ideas will be made smarter by being challenged or having new ideas and nuance added to them by other folks. So my number one goal in the stakeholder engagement is to make our ideas even stronger in terms of the outcomes, the enforceability, and the results they will deliver. I've also been very transparent with everybody. I want to use this opportunity to stress test these. My goal is that we are not surprised by any opposition when it comes time to legislation or when it comes time to new rules or expectations. So I'm going to be looking to work with all of you to make sure we get all of that input from those with lived experience whose lives we're trying to improve to the businesses or the local governments whose are going to be responsible and may have some effects from all of this. We'll be working to get these out to places like the Chambers of Commerce, the Economic Development Corporation, Metro Caucus of Mayors, the Municipal League, and a lot of local governments. We've also already spoken. The Lieutenant Governor is championing us, making sure that our own cabinet officials, who I'm not personally convinced have been following all of the details of this, but I know they're going to be feeling some of the recommendations when we say, we need you to do better. We need you to do more. So that's the real purpose of this stakeholder engagement. One, make our ideas stronger to improve lives for people. And two, make sure that we surface any concerns or opposition we may have down the line. Rep Ortiz got on once I was already running my mouth. So Rep Ortiz, as vice chair, I want to bring you in if you had any opening comments before we go into this conversation about process.
Yeah. Hey, buddy. My biggest thing is going to be like when we do get feedback, making sure that we challenge those that are giving feedback too. Like if they want to come back with the same tired excuses that people with disabilities have always heard, like it's too expensive or now's not the right time, that's not what we're looking for. So maybe some guidance from you and Carrie as you approach stakeholders on their feedback by stating, okay, like we understand that we live in a limited world that is limited by time and space and resources. So if resources are going to be difficult, state that, but don't state it without offering a solution. Otherwise, I don't want to hear it. Like otherwise, that is ableist. That would be like saying, no, we can't secure rights for Latinos, or we can't secure rights for women because it's too expensive. That's bull, and that's not an excuse. So I just want to make sure that, that as we start collecting feedback, that you and Carrie continue the amazing work that you've done in guiding the subcommittees and all of us, and make sure you offer that to those that are offering feedback as well, that don't just give the same tired excuses, give a solution if you do try and come with those. That's how we solve this problem. Other than that, just really want to appreciate everybody and their work here. And, the subcommittees, I've been listening in and to see their growth over the past 2 or 3 months and the solutions that are coming forward has been stellar to see. And I know that has a lot to do with you and Carrie's hard work. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Representative. And it really has been our honor to work with these subcommittees. I think it was all of you in selecting the members that gave us the powerful opportunity we have with them. And I take to heart your reminder to make sure that people are solution focused. I think we've done that in our framing language, but we will continue anytime we talk with some of these groups, do outreach. Carrie and I are doing outreach to a lot of folks, from chambers to EDCs to local governments. And we will always use that language of, don't tell me what we can't do. Tell me what the solution is to do better than what we're doing now. And I will make sure that we include that as we put language and outreach together. With that, this is going to be a fairly informal conversation. What I'd like to start doing is just hearing from all of you what you'd like to do and how you want this group to approach. There's two conversations. Today's conversation will be process. How do we decide to act or not act on recommendations? How do we want to approach this group surfacing or creating additional recommendations? At our next meeting, we'll get into what will the report look like and the specific elements. I've shared a bit about what the subcommittees will look like in terms of problem they're looking to solve, North Star, and immediate steps. We'll talk about the structure of ours because it's going to need to get a little more wonky and a little more specific in the actions you want to see. But what I don't want to have happen is us all decide which ideas we like or not, and based on that, then decide how we're going to vote as a group on recommendations. I'd like to establish some norms of how we want to approach this. I do expect we will probably have separate meetings to address each subcommittee's recommendations. As you all have felt for the last year, there is so much information that I don't possibly want to tackle running for office, fixing housing, fixing the ski industry, and addressing CATA in a single meeting. So we'll probably have one for each. And I will be asking for some pre-reading of their recommendations. But I see we've got a couple of hands up. So let me first go to Julie and then to Elizabeth.
Thanks. So I had a question. Well, first of all, I wanted to make a comment before I forget that these short things that Dora made are fantastic. Like I was staying up at night wondering who is going to put this into anything resembling plain language, like that anyone could read. And these little pages are great. So I just wanted to say that out loud. So I can't remember now if we talked about this. So one is like well, these are both process questions. I think we had talked in the beginning about saying that if we're not unanimous, we would allow a minority report. I'm a big fan of that to make sure that everyone's heard. So I can't, if we didn't already make that recommendation, I would like to make that recommendation. And then my question is, where is it that we get to weigh in on some of these recommendations? Because like I've been listening to them and it's been very hard, but I think effectively kept quiet. But to like, or is there a point, or do we just listen to the public and then vote? Because like there's some that I just think some of us might have thoughts about. And then in terms of what Rep. Ortiz said, I think that the way you frame the questions, like you didn't say, do you like it or not? You said like, what might need to be tweaked for this to work. And so hopefully the way that you framed it stops the world's going to end if we provide accessibility stuff that we sometimes hear, because you're not really asking like yes or no. You're saying what might be good about this, what might you need to, it's more nuanced, which I really like. I think that we'll get fewer comments because you're asking people to think, and people are more likely to comment when they can just click. But I think that's okay. I do think it's important, again, that we really get this out and document what we get out. So if certain groups don't comment, that when we're talking into legislators, that we're able to say, hey, we asked them 17 times to please comment. Not that there's a law that says they have to, but I think legislators generally are annoyed when someone comes complaining about something when they have had input. Often what you hear there is, well, no one asked. And I think we're doing that work of making sure that people are going to be asked and that we're taking all input. We're not just seeking the people who agree with us. We're very much seeking out the people who we think might not agree with us. And we want to hear their stuff.
No, that's right. And let me go through several of your points there. Julie, on the question of the minority report or opinion, we did take a vote while we had a quorum, and you all did decide that where there is not a unanimous support, that we will include that minority opinion for each of these recommendations. So that's one thing. On your comment about the types of input, you're absolutely right. Now, on the Engage Dora, as we've structured each of these and are seeking input, we specifically ask questions like, what concerns do you have about this idea, or what do you think are the implications of this? What do you see as the strengths? What ideas do you have that you would like the committee to consider about this idea? So we are not asking any yes or no. This may irritate some folks, but there are no check the box. There are no multiple choice. There are no scales of stars. It requires thoughtful input. So we'll see. That's where I get a little nervous about how much input, and I'm going to be continuing to ask for everybody's help getting it. But to your point, we want the thoughtful input. I think you raise a really interesting question, and I want to talk about it with everybody today on the executive committee input. We do want your input. And I think what we need to figure out with all of you sitting here today is you have been probably the most engaged of folks outside of the subcommittees. You know the reasons for this. We've had these conversations. So it would be a missed opportunity to not have your input. I think what we need to figure out is how we bring it in a way that isn't overshadowing of other input. And a question for all of you, I could see several ways, but I'll take suggestions from all of you. Do you want to have your input tagged as this is the input from an executive committee member? Do you want that batched together and shared? The following is input from executive committee members. Whether we name who provided it or not, we categorize it as from this group. Or obviously everybody can continue to use the same means of input as the executive or as the public itself. But Julie, since you raised it, I'll ask you first, and then I'll ask the other members. How would you like to approach providing your valuable input to the subcommittees?
I mean, I'm open to any. I've deliberately not used Engage Dora because I thought we weren't supposed to. So I have not. So I mean that however you all want to do it is fine. I mean, I don't have like a ton. There are just a few things where I just had some. Again, more of like those questions that you ask, like what, like possible, and it's only with a couple things like possible unintended consequences, or maybe we need to ask these people, or those, it's not a lot. I know we were supposed to be quiet and let the committees do their work, so I can only be quiet for so long.
No, and I have sincerely appreciated it, and I know it is tough when you're hearing this group and you're passionate about it. I appreciate that you let me bring you on to a call and then let me ask you not to talk. So I'm happy to have you share your input in any ways. Elizabeth, you've had your hand up, I think not about this topic, but let me bring you in if you've got thoughts on how you'd like to share your input and on whatever else it was that you wanted to weigh in on.
I don't know that I have an opinion one way or the other about how we share our input or whether or not it's tagged as executive committee feedback or not. I don't think it matters to me whether or not it's, we're tagged or not. Certainly all of the conversations we have are public and open. And if somebody was so curious as to find out where the comment came from, I'm sure they would track it down. So that doesn't matter to me. My questions were actually around the forms that you've put out with the QR code and what have you. So I'm going to hold that, Barrick, until we're finished with this conversation. And if you don't mind looping back to me, that'd be great.
I will. Thank you very much. Let me go to our chair and vice chair. Lieutenant Governor or representative, do you all have thoughts for the group to consider? It can range anything from you send it to me on your personal letterhead and I read it off that this is from Miss Julie Reskin or this is from Lieutenant Governor, or you could send it all and Carrie and I could consolidate it and say, here are the combined thoughts of your exec committee, or we can stick with the general member of the public input. It's really for you all to think about how it will influence and be read and be considered. Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, I don't really care that it's on my letterhead and I give you input. I don't care about that. I'll probably be working with Josh and he'll probably help me compile it all in some fashion. So I think a collective, thought would be good. I had a question of Josh this morning. I know once upon a time when Rep. Ortiz sponsored the legislation, I think Dora was going to hire 1.5 FTEs to help with the process of all this. And Ginny Brown, I know, is on and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure we hired either one of those. And so I was wondering if we have any money left, could we put out a public service announcement that we're looking for this kind of input from the public? Could we put something in the Denver Business Journal or some of those other, maybe other publications that we can think of that asking for this input from people? Because I mean, to be really honest, I don't think people know that this Dora website probably even exists unless you're really tuned into this stuff like Julie and Rep Ortiz and me and the rest of the committee are. And I don't want it to come to legislative session and these bills pop up and people say, oh my God, where did these come from? You know, we didn't hear anything about this. And I'm sure there'll probably be some cabinet members that say the same thing, actually, that don't pay attention maybe in the cabinet meeting. But I'd like to cast as wide a net as we can. And if we have some extra money, let's use it.
Lieutenant Governor, let me see if I can answer a few of those to the best that I know, and then see. I know Ginny was between two meetings. I'll see if I can lure her in. I know part of that budget was intended to hire a researcher, and they tried several times posting that position, and we just couldn't find somebody who would take the time limited position with the kind of skill that we need. So frankly, Ginny and Katie, on top of their 80-hour-a-week workload already, have been leaning in to do a lot of that additional work. Katie, you know, people have lauded those 2-pagers. 99% of that credit goes to Katie O'Donnell, who really picked up that. And I can tell you, she was at Breckenridge in a conference and was messaging us as she was working on them. She's getting ready to go on another statewide tour for something else for Dora, I believe related to the PUC, but I'll let her correct me. And she's going to be sharing this information there. We certainly have been reaching out to folks like CML and Metro Caucus. And just to close the loop on that, we will be including in the report you all get an appendix that lists everyone who ever spoke to, presented to, or was invited to provide input on any of this. There's also a process point we'll talk about in just a minute. There's going to be, we can talk about whether we want to have the input right now when there's ideas, or once we have the recommendation reports in the early November that you all will be considering, do we want then those formal recommendations to be a source of additional input? But let me get Ginny to answer the question of resources and any PSAs. And then Lieutenant Governor, I see your hand back up, so I'll come back to you. And then Elizabeth, I'm still coming back to you on process, but let me go to Ginny.
I talked first, Barrett, because I didn't
Please,
want
absolutely.
I didn't want to insinuate that Ginny was not working hard.
Oh God, no.
So that we can't pay her any extra for her work. Money in the budget, can we really cast a wide net? So Ginny, I've known you for a quarter of a century probably, and I so just wanted to clarify, Barrett.
Yeah.
No, appreciate that. And yeah, I just want to reiterate what Barrick said. We did go out a couple of times, you know, and just did not get what we were ultimately looking for. What I can do is dig in a little bit more, because one of the things that was not in the fiscal note that we have been using the money for are interpreter services for Shannon Callahan on the government subcommittee. So that's been really helpful to use, you know, the money for that. But let me dig in a little bit and see what sort of outreach and education. But to Barrick's point, a lot of what we've done so far has been in kind with regards to like the work that Katie did. So that's all Katie. So she did that in her spare time. But let me dig in and see what we can do.
Julie or Rep Ortiz, were you responding to these current topics, or should I go to Elizabeth, her question, then come to you?
Current.
Okay, jump in, Julie.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, Lieutenant Governor, your boss has quite the social media following, and maybe he could post several times on his social media. I think, you know, Rep Ortiz also has a lot, you know, but I'm thinking like, who else do we know that has like a huge, and at least, I mean, and his posts will often get critics, so that's what we want. So that was all.
And I know Katie is also making requests of, we've got the Gov's official media team in communications, and then we have what the Gov does with his iPhone when he's, you know, in the back of the car being driven somewhere that nobody quite seems to control. So we'll see if we can get it at both of those. Representative Ortiz.
Okay, so a couple things. One, just weigh in on, because you were asking both me and Lieutenant Governor about formal or not, undifferentiating input or not. I can see an argument for both. I will acquiesce to the group either way. Like, I could see why it might be important to know whether it comes from executive committee or not, just for the public. But also, like, a lot of us live with a disability and would also hopefully be weighing in generally. So it's up to you guys. As far as like getting input, I'm just going to be, push back a little bit and be real honest. Social media is not going to do it, guys. Like, and I'm speaking from someone that has run some of the best campaigns in the state, that knows what it takes to get people to show up or to get input. Posting on your social media and hoping, that people bite on that is not going to work. Like, we need to make phone calls. We need to do text messages. We need to enlist those that we might know that are important in the community, right? Like, to also text and post for themselves, right? Like, that is what it's going to take. And don't be afraid to assign, especially the executive committee, homework, Barrick. If it is, well, I want Rep Ortiz to work with advocates that he knows, like CCDC, DLC, ARC, to call within their membership to weigh in. We should be willing to do that. If chambers of commerce and others that usually might have opposing views want to do that, then they should do that for themselves. But that, I really think that's incumbent on you and Carrie to, and maybe on the chair and co-chair to make that ask. Like, hey, because no matter what we do, I want to be very clear too, no matter what we do here, how full we do or don't do our work, there will always be people that come back when bills come forward and say, well, we weren't consulted. That has always been used as a tool. This is not going to stop that being used as a tool, right? I just want to make that very clear. But we should be doing our level best and being able to show our homework that we did our best, but also put some of the onus on the Chamber of Commerce reps that are there. Like, well, you had a member represented there and we asked them to reach out to y'all and they chose not to, right? Like, we should not be afraid to be giving people that have made the commitment to be on these committees and subcommittees homework so that we can get more full input from community at large. So I'll just leave it at that.
Understood and appreciate it. And I am certainly not above or below assigning homework, so I will take you up on that. And now you have volunteered each of the exec committees to receive homework from me, so I appreciate that. Elizabeth, let me get you in now.
Okay. I want to talk about the information pieces that you guys put together. That they're really wonderful visually. I'm wondering how you, Barrick, and your team or whoever's doing the actual drafting, I recognize that you said in them that they're drafts, they're not ready to go out just yet. How would you like to receive feedback that we all have for you? Is through email? You want us to do them here in this meeting? How would you like to receive feedback?
You are reading my mind, and here's my plan for today. We have a 90-minute meeting scheduled. I'm actually going to end the Zoom after 60 minutes and ask each of you to use that 30 minutes that you already saved for this call to read those, write up your thoughts for me, and email them to Carrie and me.
Perfect. So I will do that. And then I wanted to know a deadline. When is the anticipated, when do you anticipate them being ready for distribution? And then what are we asking for stakeholders to give us that feedback? And in the big scheme of what you laid out between now and what's happening over the next 6 weeks, when are we asking the public and stakeholders to give us that feedback? Because I didn't see a date anywhere on there, give us feedback by when.
No, you're absolutely right. And part of it has been the moving target of me having asked Katie to pile on to her statewide tour and everything else, getting these done for us. Our goal is to have these fully finalized this week.
Okay.
My intention then is to have an initial 2-week period for that public input, which is why we want to make sure that we're coordinated and ready to go. I will be transparent with you. We're going to ask for the input in that 2-week period once these are all ready to go. I'm not going to ask Dora to shut down the website itself on day 15. If ideas keep coming in or feedback, we'll let that trickle in because the subcommittees will start around August 16th or October 16th having their conversations, but they will go into early and mid-November continuing those. We're thinking the 2 weeks because we want to create some sense of urgency. My experience is as soon as I tell people you have 3 or 4 weeks, they wait 3 or 4 weeks to even think about it. So that's our plan, is about a 2-week window. The other question that we'll have to work through as an exec committee is when you get those reports in November, do you want to open those up to the same types of input on these final recommendations? Right now, we're trying to get the ideas shaped into recommendations.
And then when you are receiving feedback from these, will that feedback from them, how will it be presented to us? Will it go through the committee first and then come to us? Will it come to us? Will it have identifiers on it? Is it being anonymized? How will that work?
So people have the option to either self-identify or not when they submit the recommendation, their input. Carrie and I will be consolidating and summarizing. We will not edit it down. It will be presented word for word in its fullest, probably thickest format with
Okay.
a summary of it. We will provide that to all of the subcommittees and to all of you as we present that to the subcommittees for their discussion.
Great. Some of this stuff I'll just email you. I am particularly interested in how, I just want to put this on your radar, how we are accommodating folks who are either nonverbal or non-traditional communicators to make sure we're including that population. So I'll give you an example of how my office does it. Whenever we send out a survey or an ask for stories, we put a name and a phone number, and I want to say it was Carrie's name that was on it. And in our office, we let them know in that publication, they can call us and talk to us either with a support person, what have you, and we will fill it out for them. And then we put in the form, submitted by this person, input provided by, Carrie Steele or whoever. And I'm wondering if there will be a live person because, I'm thinking about folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, Alzheimer's, dementia, what have you, who don't necessarily interface well with technology. But if they had a person they could call and tell that story with some supports in place, I think that would be very helpful.
We do the same.
I love the suggestion. I love the idea. I know from our team's, daily work, every one of my staff's email signatures provides a contact information. It is Carrie for our team, who people can contact. I would love to follow up with you, Elizabeth, and figure out language to offer that thing. And then, Ginny, I'm going to have to work with you, depending on how many requests like that we get, if I can attract some additional support. But Carrie and I will make ourselves available to do exactly that.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then, oh, that's it. The rest I think is email worthy for our home. Thank you.
Let me bring it back to process. I read you all the language from the legislation, which in plain language says this: you all can read, act on, or throw away anything you get from a subcommittee. I personally think there is risk to you waiting until you get the ideas to say this is generally how we're going to approach it. So I would love to just hear from all of you how you think the executive committee should act on recommendations you get from the subcommittees, whether you're keeping them, whether you are building on them, whether you're revising them. Are there times when you may want to vote to discard them, and what should that threshold be to reject a committee recommendation? I also do want to emphasize you have the right to add new ideas, either because you think the committee just missed the mark, or I know Michael and I have had conversations about scooters that are being left on sidewalks that create a hazard. And it's not that I think any of our subcommittees disagree with that. We just hadn't had the opportunity to talk about something like that. And I don't want you all to think there isn't every opportunity for you to add more to it. So would love your thoughts on how you want to handle when a recommendation comes in that is unanimously supported or an overwhelmingly majority supported. Do you want the general approach to be that you act on some form of it, but you're open to tailoring it to get it right? Or how might you want to approach either rejecting an idea wholly or adding a brand new idea? And Julie, your hand's up first.
Well, first of all, I think if we reject something wholly, we owe it to the people that did all this work to give a reasonable explanation as to why. That's just common courtesy. That's kind of why I was asking about how do we give input, because do we do something now? Should we give input now so that it can go back to the subcommittee to say like, hey, this was a concern, versus doing it like kind of the way everyone else is doing it. But you know, again, I don't really care how it gets tagged, but I don't want them to like do all this work and go down this thing and then have us like, because again, I expect that if there are concerns, it's not going to be this idea is horrible. It's like, have you thought about X or what about Y? So I think like that level of communication with the subcommittees is reasonable. And then I think one, you know, so we might say, okay, out of 100 recommendations, we like 50, we're discarding 30, and 20 we're not sure about. And then we get the public input, and maybe that then changes our, because I think we then owe it to the public to read it and then look at how does this change things? So to me, it seems like there's a couple steps.
How do folks feel about that? And I think there's a couple of pieces. One, Julia, I think you raise a very high potential tool of sharing your input so that the committees know, hey, the exec committee has this concern, or the exec committee has this area of emphasis for you to consider. But Julie also shared some additional thinking. Lieutenant Governor.
Well, I agree with Julie that out of common courtesy, we let people know and know why. There may be some things we reject wholly. I mean, maybe we'll come up with so many ideas that we don't have enough legislative bandwidth to get them all through or whatever. So there might be tiers to that too, that we might reject it this year, or we'll come back to it next year, or it depends on something else passing or something like that. So yeah, I mean, there might be some ideas we to just totally reject, but based on the expertise of the committees, I would doubt, you know, that there'd be a whole lot of those, but we might reject them just, like I said, for other reasons, and we might come back to them later on in another year, another time, because we're not going to have Rep. Ortiz there being our champion in the legislature, unfortunately. I tried to talk him out of quitting, but couldn't do it. So I hope somebody else will come along that will be the champion that we need in the legislature.
I like that point, that there may be ideas that you say we're going to push this down the road, or there may, and we'll provide that explanation. Rep. Ortiz.
Yeah, so thanks for bearing with me. I'm at physical therapy as we're doing this meeting. A couple of things that I want to bring to light on my opinions, and would love to get input on that. One, I think it should be a simple majority whether to accept or reject or not. So that's my opinion. I think we should elevate those things that are unanimous the most. Like there should be a separate report of these recommendations were unanimous. They should be at the top of the report, in my opinion. If we come up with our own recommendations, I think we should be able to make recs apart from what the subcommittees put forward, because some of us might have more or less experience in an area. You know, you can only be so inclusive with 10 to 12 members of a subcommittee. So I think we as an executive committee should be allowed to put forward ideas. And if it's something unanimous, then maybe we definitely put those forward as something, you know, this came from executive committee, but it's unanimous. If it's mixed or close, you know, if it's simple majority that either votes for it or doesn't support, maybe we can have a section of the report that's like, these are areas that need further looking into, that the executive committee brought up as critical areas that subcommittees and this executive committee did not have time to vet out enough, or something like that. So those are my recommendations there. And I really appreciate what Elizabeth had to say to make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible for those with visible and invisible disabilities when it comes to giving input. So appreciate that.
And so, you know, Jenny and Aubrey have been messaging me with their full commitment to assist with those conversations. So Rep. Ortiz, you raised the point of adding new ideas, and I don't think anybody has suggested not doing so. Is there a way that anybody, and Rep. Ortiz, I'll ask you first if PT allows right now, is there a way that you'd like to engage with the subcommittees? Is that necessary when you have new ideas? Or do you think we should have an exec committee meeting that, for example, is focused on outdoor recreation, and we review first all of their ideas, starting with tiering them by which were unanimous and how we're going to approach them, And then do we just do a second piece of here are new ideas? And then kind of as by notification, we share them back to the subcommittee?
I mean, I think it might be smart to vet them through the subcommittees, especially because that's their job in that area. Like I am for putting, if we have time and if we are able to make their meeting, to put our ideas to the subcommittee if there's something that we have not heard yet, that we want to see put forward. And if they reject it or if they say that they don't have time to consider it, then I think we as executive committee members should have the prerogative to consider those on our own, separate from them, if they choose not to address it or to make recommendations one way or another on it.
So I will tell you from a facilitation standpoint, I really like the idea of, if it's possible, to bring those ideas to the subcommittee at the meetings when they're digesting stakeholder input, to say, here's all the feedback you got on your ideas, and here's what the exec committee wanted you to additionally consider. And to your point, Representative, they may say, we love this, we're going to put this forward. They may say, we just haven't had the time to digest it, but we're generally on board. And you're all obviously free to do with it as you would like. How would members of the exec committee feel about that approach? That when we're providing stakeholder input, that's really the first window to provide from all of you input on ideas that haven't yet been developed. Do I get to take silence as agreement?
I mean, I'm going to say, unless they get over their shyness and speak up, I'm going to take that silence as agreement.
Very good. And you will also see, if you look at the documents that are in that 1296 folder on the Google Drive, which I can send around, there are also a number of ideas that this group, for example, in their last meetings, started the, hey, what about and what if? And there are ideas that require further discussion, so they're not going to be putting forward recommendations. There's certainly food for thought for all of you, and we can determine. The subcommittees will likely include them in their reports in a section of ideas we didn't yet have enough time for, or ideas that were outside of our scope. And we think there is additional work to do around it. And I can tell you, some of those range from things like the use of medically prescribed cannabis by individuals with disabilities. And they identified that as an issue in need of being addressed, but didn't feel like either the science or the time was sufficient to get to what that would look like in its entirety. That will come to you as something they discussed but didn't act on. We dealt with a number of things within both the judicial system, like the rights of parents with a disability and what happens in things like custody hearings, to some other issues around medical care, and the guidance that is given for example, to the parents of a deaf child on what their solutions are. So ideas that percolated up, but they didn't feel they had sufficient time to be able to make a recommendation, or they were outside of the scope of their work. Rep Ortiz has suggested that our threshold be a simple majority. And that was the conversation we had 6 months ago. And that was the decision made at the time, was that it would be a simple majority to advance something, with the minority opinion included. Is there anybody who has strong feelings otherwise? I'm getting shaking of the head, so we will proceed that way. It is something that was voted on when we did have a quorum. So we are going to stick with that and not unwind a decision, which to me is progress, or at least we're not regressing on that. My next question for all of you. We have loved having you join the subcommittees. Do you have any different thinking as they go into deliberations? Do you want to continue to engage that way? Is it still appropriate? Does anybody have any different feelings? And I don't raise the question because there's been a concern asked. I just want to make sure we're all aligned on how we're approaching this. Julie, and then Lieutenant Governor, please.
Well, I just think if we do join them, we should stay quiet and maybe even off camera, or we should not join them, one or the other. But I think we should. On one hand, I think that. On the other hand, I do think some engagement might be nice.
Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed listening, and I think sometimes after legislation is passed, you just get these black words on a white piece of paper and you really don't understand the context. So I think, it would help me understand the context, but yet I've been told, which really always makes me laugh, that just my presence at a meeting sometimes is threatening. And people don't feel like they want to speak up or can speak up. And I don't consider myself a threatening person, but so I wouldn't want to do anything that where they didn't feel free to speak up. But yet for me, it would give me some context as to, what they're thinking. So
I'm hearing a bent and a tendency towards join, but stay quiet maybe in these final deliberations. But let's keep going. Elizabeth, your thoughts?
I would concur. I think that I would like to be invited. I would like to be just to better understand sort of some of the nuances, but also I think that we should sit back and but also to be there as a resource in case there are clarifying questions that anyone might have. Not to insert ourselves, but if we are called upon to answer questions, I would certainly like to make myself available.
I think the two things you raised are extremely valuable. I think one, all of you hearing the context of the discussions instead of just what Carrie and I capture as the answer or the decision, there is value for all of you. And if not, you're not all able to join, at least, Elizabeth, if you're on the call and you can share back with the exec committee, hey, here's what I heard as some of the background on this. I think that's great. And I do agree that you all as a resource, if they say, well, hey, what's the exec committee looking for? What do they want? Or what's the background? So let me ask, are there objections to us establishing that our norm will be for these final two deliberation calls, and it may be three, depending on how much we have to do, but for the final deliberations on recommendations, that we do the following. You all provide your input to Carrie and me in advance, and we consolidate it. That includes where you have new ideas. That we invite you to every one of those calls, but that you stay quiet unless there is a point of clarification. Are there any concerns or objections to that approach to the deliberation meetings? Okay. Then with that, it's 4:26. Now is when I'm going to break us a little bit early. I did this intentionally because I know when I give homework at the end of a call, people like Barrick, you had me, and now you're trying to make me do more. So I'm keeping you within my window. What I'd love for you to do, you've got those the sample summary documents. Katie and I are still working to fine edit some of them where we need to. Katie did a remarkable job taking 2-paragraph ideas and distilling them into 1 or 2 sentences. We're still working to massage those a bit, but I would be grateful if you would take the next 20 or 30 minutes, take a look at those and let us know, are they accessible, both from an accessibility standpoint and from a language, and do they make sense? Do they accomplish what we're intending, which is to kind of hit people in the face with, here's the short version and here's where you can go to find more information. So I would love for you to take a look at them from that 10,000 foot of, is this getting it done? And also just flag to me and to Carrie, hey, this idea, I wasn't quite clear where you were going with it, so that Carrie and Katie and I can work together to make that language a little stronger. So it's kind of the overall, how does this approach feel? How does each subcommittee's document feel to you? And are there ideas that aren't clear in the way that we ended up shortening them so that we can tighten it up? And if I can ask you all to use your time instead of our 90 minutes, use the next 20 or 30 minutes to go through those, and over the next 12 to 24 hours, send that feedback to me directly. And then Katie and I will work with the team to get those polished up.
The short documents or the long
Yes.
ones?
The short ones.
And do you want actual input or just if we see anything?
So not input on the ideas of here's what's strong or weak on the ideas. These are the ideas the subcommittees have decided to put forward. What I would like feedback on is the way it got shortened comprehensible? Does it make sense, or do we need to improve that?
And did we decide how we're going to give input on the ideas? Or
You
what's the
can-
appropriate format?
I think where we landed is if you're free to use Engage Dora however you want. What I would ask is that once we finalize these ideas and put them out, that you just send your input directly to Carrie and to me by email. If it's easier, Carrie and I are also happy
Okay.
to jump on the phone with you, and then we'll consolidate it and share it back out. Okay. Representative Ortiz or Lieutenant Governor, do you have any final words before we send everybody back to their desk for homework?
Well, first of all, I admire Rep. Ortiz for being in PT at the same time, multitasking like this. So that's that's amazing. No, I'm just, I'm really excited, looking forward to all the recommendations, hoping that, we can make a difference. People ask me, why do you do this Lieutenant Governor stuff? And, I always tell them if we get to a point where we're not making a difference, then I'm not going to do it. But if we can make a difference, that's really important. So I appreciate your work, Barrick. I think the subcommittees, people that were appointed were great. I think the executive committee's amazing. I'm always amazed with Julie, but I always have been for the last 50 years, Julie, however many years we've worked together. So anyway, thanks. I'm looking forward to our final products.
Well, with that, I'll let you go to homework time. I'm going to be following up with the Dora team. Thank you all. We'll follow up with you all by email as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.